Good afternoon and welcome to the Porzio Planning webinar series. My name is Deirdre Wheatley-Liss and I am delighted to invite you today to our seminar on clutter clearance and financial housekeeping, supporting well-being and aging in place. I will be your host today. I'm here with Deborah Gussoff. Deborah, if you can wave before I get a chance to introduce you. Thank you so much for joining us. Our mission with Porzio Planning is very, very simple. A knowledgeable family is a more empowered family. So each month we take the opportunity to connect with you on topics that may be of interest. These topics have come up out of our practices where we've had the need for other professionals to help us with issues that clients have. My relationship with Deborah is because we've had clients who've had issues with downsizing potentially their parents, with somebody who's passed away and maybe the executor lives across the country, or with clients who really want to move to Florida as an example, but just don't know what to do with the 5-bedroom house that they have in northern New Jersey, and how can we help them along with that. So how do we know if this was a good seminar? We know it's a good seminar if every single one of you who's listening says, hey, wow, I didn't know that. So you learned something new today. Here's the issue with the things in your house. Clutter causes stress and anxiety, even paralysis around the idea of decluttering. We specifically scheduled this webinar to go live in January because many of us have really awesome New Year's resolutions right now about what we're going to do with our house this year. But absent a plan, I would suggest to you that your chances of accomplishing that resolution are not going to be very high. So whether you're looking at downsizing and making your own space, maybe making your safe space more peaceful, making a space safer for a loved one so they can remain at home, that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And as always, we're here for you. Our purpose is to give you information that you find that would be enjoyable. And it helps us if we actually know a little bit more about who you are. So with that, Lee, if I could ask you to launch our first polling question. So if you could just take a moment, we're just going to have it up for like 30 seconds. What category best describes where you are in life? A young adult, you're married, but you don't have children. You're a parent with folks under, children either underfoot because they're in school, or potentially you're a parent where your children have returned to you as a result of, we're filming this in the beginning of 2021, still in the middle of the COVID pandemic. An empty nester, or maybe a baby boomer or a senior who's looking to downsize. And if you're listening today because you're trying to help a baby boomer or senior downsize, click that one as well. So I think we let that run. So if you can go ahead and close that down when you get a chance, Lee. As I said, we're coming off of 2020 right now. A year that everybody is more than happy to say good riddance to. And a lot of us have been spending a lot more time in our homes. I'm recording this out of my home office right now. And because we spend so much time in our homes, we may be looking around at all the stuff that we've accumulated over the years and said, does this work out for me or doesn't? Or maybe you've been in a role of supporting family members, but because of the COVID restrictions, you haven't been able to be there with them. Is there a way to make their space safer and healthier for them if they're going to have to live more independently because family members haven't been able to be as physically close to be able to support them? And what about just, the emotional issues? Sometimes people are left with a house, and because somebody passed away, when you're left with a house, you're left with all the stuff in the house. It's very hard to go through that. There's all sorts of memories that are associated with that. What are some techniques, tools, tricks to be able to go through those things and to be able to clean them out? So with that, can we show our poll results before we go into more detail? Excellent. So most of us right now are parents. As I said, I expanded that category because lots of us have people that are coming back. Married with no children, empty nester, and baby boomers around the same. So Deb, any comments that you have on our audience members right now?
So looks like lots of busy people dealing with family members trying to work from home while dealing with children who are being homeschooled. Lots of empty nesters, maybe looking to do a little bit of downsizing, simplifying, maybe turning what used to be a child's bedroom into a home office while we're all stuck working from home. And then there were a lot of people who, about a quarter of the audience, looking to downsize as well. So lots of challenges there also.
Excellent. If you guys could flip to the next slide, please. I just want to introduce myself in a little bit more detail. As I said, my name is Deirdre Wheatley-Liss. I'm a principal at Porzio, Bromberg and Newman. I am one of the leaders of our wealth preservation team, and I'm the co-founder of PorzioPlanning.com. Porzio Planning is an idea that grew out of COVID, where we were saying to ourselves, how can we better support the community? How can we get people information on questions that they're asking and they don't have resources for? And that's what Porzio Planning is here for. So you may have a good sense of what I do. I'm an attorney. You see attorneys on TV. I'm an estate and elder law attorney. You may have absolutely no clue what a professional organizer does. That's why Deborah Gussoff is here today from In Order Inc. Deborah is a certified professional organizer. So Deb, can you tell our audience maybe what it is that a certified professional organizer does and a little bit more about your background?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me. So for the last 25 years, what I've been doing is helping clients streamline, simplify, and declutter their homes, their offices, and their lives. And that means not only organizing physical stuff, but also things like paper, household filing systems, vital documents, financial organizing, and time management. So it's really helping them organize all aspects of their life. And the goal is to help them be more productive and efficient and use their time the best way that they can, rather than wasting time being frustrated looking for things that they can't find.
So, and we've all been there. So I don't even have to ask an audience poll to say yes or no, because I know that the answers would be 100% yes. I think one of the things that you wanted to ask, Deborah, so that we can really frame our discussions here, is maybe what is the biggest challenge that people are having with clutter? So again, this is interactive, so I'm going to ask if people can respond to this. Lee, if you can launch the next poll. What's your sort of your biggest problem around clutter? Is it paper? And I will give you a preview. We are going to be talking to you about paper that you need to keep, which by definition means there's paper that you don't need to keep. Clutter. Other people's stuff. One of the things that I run into when we're dealing with estate administrations is that people have done collections over their lifetimes that may take up a lot of space, but not necessarily have a lot of extrinsic value, but they have emotional importance. So what can we do around that? Difficulty getting rid of things. Again, I think we can probably all raise our hands. And most importantly, not having enough time to tackle it. Because, as Deborah was saying, particularly with so many parents in the audience, you already have multiple jobs. Having another job is not necessarily something you can add to your plate right now. So if you can close down the poll before we get to the results, I just remind everybody that the reason why we do this is for you. So if you have any questions at all, please type them into the question box, the chat box that's there on the side. Deborah and I will try to address them as we're speaking to go through the questions. Some of them we may end up holding till the end, and we'll set a few minutes aside for those. If your question doesn't get answered, please don't worry. Through the beauty of technology, we have a copy of all the questions, and we can then just reach out to you via email after the webinar. Or if you're watching this as a recording, our contact information is here, and you can just reach out to us directly with any questions that you may have. So with that, Lee, could you just launch the poll results, please? So Deborah, what are your thoughts?
So I'm actually surprised that paper was not higher. Usually that tends to be the bane of everybody's existence, and I usually see numbers closer to 50%. So we're kind of split between paper and the difficulty getting rid of things, and it can be really hard to make those decisions and figure out what you need to keep, what you can safely get rid of, and how to get rid of it.
Excellent. So if we can go ahead and flip to the next slide. How do you figure out what's safe to keep and what can you get rid of? I think some of this goes into people's mindsets in terms of that paralysis that I mentioned around your stuff. Could you talk to us maybe a little bit about what it is that prevents us from dealing with clutter either in our own homes or helping somebody with theirs?
Absolutely. So, I think for many people, it's one of two things. It's either procrastination, because all clutter is deferred decision making. At its very core, clutter is procrastination. It's putting something down on a surface for now and saying that you'll get to it later. And think about it, anything that's sitting in a pile on your kitchen counter or on your dining room table represents an action not taken or a decision that you haven't made. Making those better, faster decisions leads to better organization. So procrastination is one. The other reason is that we tend to be emotionally attached to our possessions, particularly things that have played a part in our lives. And so for many people, it's very hard making those decisions to part with things. And there are a couple of questions that I always recommend that people ask themselves when they're going through and trying to do that paring down or editing. So the first question is, do I love it? Do I use it? And do I want to maintain it? So do I love it? You know that you love something if it makes you smile when you see it, if you feel great when you're wearing it. And when we're talking about things that you love, it's things that you love today. It's not what did you love once upon a time. It's what's currently important and loved. The second question of do I use it? Or rather, do I need it? There are lots of things that we don't love, but that we need. And my favorite example of this is a toilet plunger. It's certainly not something that I love, but when I need it, I'm really glad that it's there. So it's something that's important to keep and to hold on to. And then that third question of, do you want to maintain it? If you have things that are sitting on shelves in your basement, and when you go and look at them, they have half an inch of dust on them, you're not really maintaining it. So do you really need to be holding on to it?
So even with that, when you talk about the idea of do you love it today, not 20 years ago, do you use it, whether it is a fancy decorative piece or otherwise a toilet plunger, do you want to maintain it? That's still some pretty big questions. Is there a way that folks can, to narrow that down, are steps they can take, plans they can put in place, small actions of success that might move them towards towards benefiting from those larger goals? So how does some of the planning around this, because it still seems like it's a giant piece of pizza, and where do you take that first bite?
So, and that's a great question. And one of the things that I often advise my clients is that when you're looking at that whole pizza or the whole room that's full of stuff, it can feel really overwhelming. So there's that very famous question of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's the same way that you tackle your clutter. If you have lots of stuff in a room and you don't know where to begin, start in one corner and then gradually work your way around the perimeter of the room and make those decisions little by little. And if that whole room seems like it's too overwhelming, then decide, okay, today I'm going to spend an hour and I'm going to tackle the far right corner. And then the next day I'm going to tackle the next corner and break it into little bite-sized chunks so that it doesn't feel as overwhelming. I would also recommend that you start with easier things that are very sentimental, like your kids' artwork or the stuff that you brought back to your garage after your parent died. That has too much emotion and it can be much more challenging to go through that, but it's much easier to go through, let's say, your closet, because you know what you're wearing, what you're not wearing, what fits, what's outdated. So that's an easier way to start.
Yeah, I guess the only issue with our closets right now is many of us are wearing approximately, 3% of
Right.
our closets. So maybe you want to think about, when life changes in the future. But let's take the example of an office, okay? Because you were talking about things with sentimental value. And I'm going to preface this with, I'm going to assume that paperwork is not something of sentimental value. The receipt from when you went grocery shopping 7 months ago, I'm just going to make the assumption that it's not of sentimental value, but many of us are probably guilty of still having that receipt coming around. So I wanted to talk about sort of what it is that you need to keep in the way of paper, right? So I'm a lawyer. I try very, very hard not to have a paper heavy practice. I like trees, I like oxygen and things along those lines. But I got to tell you, when we go to court or I'm dealing with the IRS or the state of New Jersey, we need documentation of things. Or I'm dealing with an estate administration, we need documentation. And sometimes I find that people get so excited about decluttering, they actually declutter things that are important. And I'm saying this with a little bit of joviality, but in a much more serious sense. Last month, we spoke about issues with aging, with dementia, with Alzheimer's. I've often had situations with older adults that have gotten rid of very important paperwork because of some of the issues with aging, and that paperwork should probably be secured in a location that doesn't allow it to be thrown out, gotten rid of. And I'll talk about that specifically with the will. So I just want to go through, and if you just want to make some notes, here's Deirdre's and Deborah's guide of actual physical paper that you need to keep. And I would suggest that the caveat to that is you don't need to keep everything else. And then Deborah, at the end of this, I'd love if you could be talking about what's a good way to keep the paper that you need to keep, right? So what do you need to keep for about 1 year, okay? For about 1 year, you need to keep things that you're going to utilize on your income tax returns that you're filing. That's the purpose of keeping papers for a year, okay? So that may be your paycheck stubs if you get them, statements that you get from your bank, your credit card, whatever the case may be, statements that you get from your investment companies that are showing things. While you do get an end of year statement, you need to make sure that it's correct with what your monthly statements are, medical bills that you had during the year, anything that's deductible for you. So maybe that's charitable deductions that you have, maybe you have business deductions that you have, anything that you need to support your tax return, you need to keep that. I'm not saying you have to keep the piece of paper, but you have to keep the information so that you can actually prepare your tax return. With medical bills, I do have a caveat with that. It's not just 1 year. You need to keep your medical bills until you know the claim is resolved. Many of us have had the experience that we get a bill a year later is the first time we see the bill for some medical procedure that was done previously. So you need to keep all of your records around that. So Deborah, in terms of the stuff that I'm saying you need to keep because it goes into your tax returns every year, any ideas around good ways of organizing that? And also on the corollary, getting rid of the stuff you don't need to keep?
Sure. So there are a couple of ways, and it depends on the individual and how comfortable they are with technology. Some people are paper and pencil type people, and some people love tech. So there's a little bit of that comes into play, but certainly you can scan documents. The IRS is now accepting scanned versions of most documentation. Or you can create a paper filing system. You mentioned bank statements. Depending on your bank, it's very possible that all of that information is available online. Some banks have 6 months, some banks have a year, some banks actually have 6 or 7 years. And so you can access that very easily if that's your banking institution and not need the actual paperwork. If you are downloading or scanning those documents, I definitely recommend that you're backing up your computer in at least 2 ways, because it's not a question of if, it's a question of when that computer is going to crash. So an external hard drive is great, but also think about backing it up to the cloud so that you have access to all of that important paperwork.
I think that's great. So when it comes to the scanner, I just sort of pulled my phone out real quick. The reason is that all of our phones are scanners. If you have a smartphone, if you have an iPad or some other kind of tablet, they are as well. And it's really easy to snap something. I'm sure you can reach out to Deborah afterwards offline if there's apps that she recommends for that. With the bank records, I do need to give one important caveat. If you have a loved one that may be applying for Medicaid in the future, so you know that they have limited resources, you know that they have health issues where they may be needing care, Medicaid requires 5 years of paper records for every bank account, investment account, life insurance policy, any asset that you have. They require 5 years of paper records. And this came to mind because, Deborah, you said, well, maybe your bank keeps the records for 6 months. If they keep the records for 6 months and Medicaid requires the records for 5 years, you can see that we have a bit of a problem there. So even if you're the one that's going to your loved one's house and grabbing the copy of the bank statement every month and pulling it back to your house to keep, it's expensive. It causes delays in being able to apply for Medicaid, and it's expensive because the banks will charge you to go back and now find the records of what it is that they need. And also, as I mentioned, with some of our older clients, there's a lot of issues of them doing their own cleaning and maybe throwing out something that's otherwise important. So I just wanted to mention that caveat. Keep for 7 years. We went from 1 year to 7 years. Two things: your income tax returns, all right? The second is any loan payoff that you've made. You've paid off a car, you've paid off a mortgage, you've paid off a credit card, okay? The reason for that is the statute of limitations. There is a 6-year statute of limitations, which means that after you file your tax return, the IRS has 6 years to come back to you and say, we have questions about it. If you don't have the paperwork, I'm quite sure that whatever questions they have will not be answered in your favor, okay? The same thing with having things paid off. Oftentimes, and I can't tell you how many times this has happened, people have paid off their mortgage. The mortgage company never filed a satisfaction of mortgage, which means that when you go to sell your property and you do a title search, it still shows the mortgage on the property that you paid off 7 years ago. You need to keep that documentation in place so that you know that debts have been paid off. It's very hard to argue a negative if you don't have the documentation. So those are ones I would say to keep for at least 7 years. The mortgage payoff I would keep as long as you're in the house, but for anything with a credit card or things like that, again, 7 years, because 6 years is a statute of limitations in New Jersey of filing a commercial claim for a money debt if something hasn't otherwise been filed.
So can I interject with a question for you? I've been told that tax returns, not all the backup, but the return itself, you should actually save forever.
I was going to get to that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Some people like to do that, but the problem is when you get to be 73 and you have 50 years of tax returns, I was going to ask you, after that period of time, is there a way that we can scan them or store them somehow so that they aren't taking up literally, boxes of space in our closet?
Yes, absolutely. You can do that. The return itself for most people is fairly thin. It's all the backup documentation that really takes up a lot of space. But the reason I brought that up was I had a client who had a problem when she went to file for Social Security because the government had 2 years where they said she didn't have income, and that was reducing her monthly Social Security payment. And because we had the tax return as backup, she was able to go and get that adjusted and realize more money each month.
So let's come up, I would say a caveat, and this is why we have this, and I said to Deborah before we started talking, literally this is what we sit down and talk about when we were, when we used to be able to see each other in person. I think maybe a better thing then is to keep your tax returns with all the backup for 7 years, and then after 7 years, you don't necessarily need the backup and keep the return forever. Maybe that would be a good rule of thumb.
Right.
Other things that you need to keep forever, any home improvement records. You built a pool, you put in a generator, you redid the roof, whatever the case may be. The reason is, and this is whether it's on your primary home or on any other actual real estate that you have, is that this goes to what the cost basis of your property is when you sell it. You need to be able to document what you invested in the property in these types of capital improvements. So you need to have all of those records saved somewhere. Similar to that, any large purchases that you made, right? The receipts for large purchases, your $5,000 Wolf oven or whatever the case may be, your Sub-Zero refrigerator, any large purchases, you need to keep those, as well as warranties, again, on any large purchase that you have. So Deborah, if somebody's keeping these things, and some of this can be relatively voluminous, do you have a recommended strategy? And let's say for somebody who doesn't scan, because even if you're going to scan these records, some of them, are very, very thick. What would you recommend?
So in a household filing system, I always have a file that says capital improvements for all of those things that you're talking about. For large purchases, I think it's helpful to have one holding place, and usually not a file because they do get very bulky. So maybe it's a box or a magazine holder for the manuals and warranties. And I often recommend attaching the receipt to it, making sure that the date is visible. Sometimes there's a warranty that's good for 3 years, and you know, time is fluid, and we kind of forget how long we've had things, and you think, oh, I just bought that, it has to still be under warranty. And then when you go to look, it's like, oh, did I really buy that 6 years ago? So having the date written on it, the date of purchase, and if you have the receipt to attach to it, and then just have one holder, magazine holders are great for all those big purchase items.
I love that idea. So stapling the receipt to the warranty. I have to say with the manuals, what I do now is I go online, and as long as the manual's online, that sucker gets recycled. Because otherwise I'd have an entire closet full of manuals that I can't read for how to do things with appliances. So
Right. Well, and with the manuals, one of the things that people often do is they get something new and they throw the new manual in with the collection of manuals, and they don't think to pull out the old one. So a really quick and easy organizing project that you can do while you're watching TV or listening to music is just sort through those manuals, make sure you still own all the items.
I like that idea. Now there are some things that you got to keep forever, okay? And I want to go through them just to give you an idea. Birth certificates, adoption papers, marriage licenses, naturalization papers, military discharge papers, okay? These are all things that are going to allow you to know with Social Security, do you qualify for survivor's benefits? Do you qualify for veterans benefits? With actual Social Security, were you married to somebody for 10 years? So divorce papers would go in there also, because if you're married to somebody for 10 years, you can claim off of what their benefits are. All of those key papers need to be kept forever. I would actually recommend scanning them as well, but you have to have the physical papers in terms of that. Insurance policies. I got a lot of people that don't want to keep insurance policies because, again, they're bulky. Or they get rid of old insurance policies, and you have to be very careful, because depending on the kind of insurance that you have, the coverage might be for when the thing happened, or the coverage could be for when the claim is made. If the coverage is for when the thing happened, you need the policy that was in place at the time that the thing happened. If it's when the claim is made, you need the policy that's in place at that point in time. So you need to keep those physicals. That would be your health insurance, your property insurance, life insurance, disability insurance. All of those need to be kept somewhere. Wills, and we have a question about wills. You have to keep your will. Now wills are very special, because the question is, should I destroy an old will if I have a new will? And my general response to that is yes, with a caveat, unless you think that you might have a problem. Okay. When I say think that you might have a problem, maybe you've disinherited somebody in each of your last 4 wills. If you make the assumption that person's not going to be happy that they're disinherited, it's helpful from an evidentiary standpoint to say, hey, this wasn't just their decision in 2019. This was their decision in 2019, 2016, 2010, 2003, and 2000, right? So in that case, you may want to keep copies of your wills. However, the only valid will is the last written will, unless it is overturned, which is well beyond the scope of this conversation. Now, for our clients, we generally keep the original wills, and I want to share with you why. If you die and we cannot find your will, because maybe your organizing system worked really, really well for you, but it's not apparent to anybody else where you keep anything, the assumption is that if you have control of your original will and it cannot be found when you pass away, that you actually destroyed the will. That is what the assumption is. You can overcome that assumption, but that's your starting point. On the flip side, if I have your original will and my building burns down and my fire safe vault melts and, you know, cows come flying out of the sky, whatever the case may be, it would be easier to probate a copy of the will, because since you didn't have the original, you clearly didn't have the intention to destroy the will. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that we maintain the wills for what it is that we have. You can get rid of your old ones. Also, if you have older powers of attorney, older living wills, and particularly any draft copies of documents, once you have the executed copies, at least for our clients, we send you a booklet that has all your executed documents. We also send them to you in electronic form. At that point, all the drafts can go away, because you have the final documents for what it is that you need. Trust have to keep all your original trust documents. Again, whether it's the copy or we have it, your power of attorney, your living will, your burial instructions. It's helpful if somebody actually knows where they are, not that they discover them several months later for obvious reasons. Your social security cards, passports, deeds, and car titles. All of those things are super important. They need to be kept somewhere super safe. So Deborah, what is your feeling on fireproof safes versus safe deposit boxes or other ways of maintaining paperwork that the original is the critical document?
So very good point. It's really important to have all of that information together and accessible someplace. I have always been told, and correct me if you know differently, that if someone happens to have a will, if their attorney, if they weren't using you and somebody's attorney wasn't keeping the original, that you should never have that in a safe deposit box, because that box gets locked until the will goes through probate. So it becomes this vicious cycle. You know, when you go to log or sign into your safe deposit box, one of the questions right after your signatures are all holders of this box currently living. And if you say no, they're not going to let you into that box. So that, I think having something at home or with a family member is a better way to have that. You can also have copies scanned, keeping the original someplace safe. And one thing that people should just be aware of is that people use the term fireproof safe. There's really nothing that is fireproof. It's fire resistant up to a certain temperature for a certain number of hours. So it will help, but that's why having a backup copy with somebody, whether it's your attorney, whether it's your adult child, or whether it's someplace off-site, can be helpful.
Yeah. So that does happen with the safe deposit box. There is a practical way around it. Name the person who's the executor as a person who's allowed to get in the safe deposit box. And that person knows where the key is.
Yes,
I have sat through safe deposit box drilling. It is not as quick as it is in the movies and on TV, I think is the way that I'm going to put that.
They charge you for that.
And they charge you for it as well, to be able to drill out a safe deposit box. So if you are going to do that, somebody else needs to be named as being able to have access to it. And I absolutely agree. That's why we have electronic as well as paper copies. Also, because our clients travel all over the place, and you may have need of your power of attorney document when you're visiting your sister in Kansas. You don't want it to be sitting in your safe back at the house that nobody is in right now and has access to. You want to be able to have that. And then for our clients, we keep scanned copies of all their documents as well, so they can just contact us at any time so that we can send it out, so we can send them out there. A question that we have here is that there is some very cosmopolitan person who has moved and bought 4 houses in under 10 years, which is a great thing to do. And the question is, do I have to keep all the home improvements? You got to keep them for at least 6 years from the time you recorded the sale of the property, because that goes with your tax returns. Because when you sold the property, you would have gotten a 1099-S for the sale of the property. You would have made some statements about whether or not that was subject to capital gains tax. In the event of an audit, you need to have that information. So I would say you need to keep those capital improvements for your prior properties for that same 7-year time frame that we talked about, keeping your tax return along with all the attachments for the tax return. I think that that makes sense. So that's paper. So we were talking about sort of how to organize your office, right? What about the whole house? So why is an asset inventory important? Well, one, I have a lot of clients that live in Florida. Florida has this really nasty habit of having hurricanes. Hurricanes have a really nasty habit of destroying what the contents of somebody's house is. And if you're making an insurance claim, how do you know what you have? Okay. A second thing is, sometimes people want very specific assets to go to someone. And I've had a lot of estates where we have a dispute after somebody dies because there was a person who was convinced that a thing existed. Okay. I know that my mom had, 18 silver spoons. They're not there. Therefore, my brother must have stolen them. Okay. I know that my father had these collection of platinum, gold, diamond encrusted watches. Now, Dad may have bought these off of some guy on Fifth Avenue, and they were neither platinum nor gold nor diamond encrusted. But by the time that somebody's passed away, that's what ends up happening. And therefore, my brother-in-law must have snuck into the house and gotten them out when Dad was in the hospital. Okay. A way of avoiding this, if you're concerned about it, is actually knowing what the stuff is that you have. And then finally, some people want to make sure that their possessions, their values, particularly if they have, antiques, or they've been the keeper of the family heirlooms, are fairly distributed around everybody. But how do you know what you have? So Deb, I know you work with your clients on doing asset inventories for a variety of reasons. What does that look like?
So a home inventory system is basically, as you said, it's a summary of the major things that you own. And it includes pictures of every room in your home from various angles, so that if you need to prove that something was really sitting in your living room, you have a picture of the wall with the fireplace and the lovely urn sitting on the mantle. It also allows you, in addition to uploading photos, to upload the receipts so that you have proof that you purchased it. You can upload repairs if you have an antique and you had it uh, modified or repaired. You can upload appraisals, all of that information in one place. So just as you said, the hurricanes in Florida, there are all kinds of natural disasters. There are wildfires out of control in California. There are hurricanes and tornadoes. There are floods, Hurricane Katrina being, a really well-known one. I know somebody who lost her entire home during Katrina. She is still, all of these years later, fighting with the insurance company because she did not have any sort of asset or home inventory proving what she had. And then, as you said, it's also very helpful in terms of aging and making sure that family members know what's there, who it's going to. I have a friend whose house burnt down in a freak fire last year, just one more 2020 disaster. And it's great to have all of your paperwork in a file at home, but what happens if, God forbid, that house burns down? All of your records go with it. So having something that is cloud-based that can be accessed from any place is really very helpful, because the reality is that nobody's immune and everybody's aging. So having records for all of that is really important from an insurance standpoint and from an inheritance and bequeath standpoint.
Thank you. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So, this is really talking about, your house and what you do. But if we can flip to the next slide, so many of us are involved with helping others. We had done a presentation with a geriatric care manager, and one of the things that we had talked about was how dangerous somebody's clutter can be to an older individual in terms of how it is that things are organized, as well as how it is, what do they have around the house. Area rugs. If you are not steady on your feet, area rugs can land you in the hospital. Holiday cookies. Holiday cookies, it is the one time of year that you use your mix master, which happens to be sitting in a lower cabinet or an upper cabinet that you need to pull out, and it weighs 46 pounds, that can cause a very negative incident to happen. Then there's just a healthiness issue in terms of, you have 7 broken vacuum cleaners in the dining room. Do they need to be there? And it's very hard when you're working with your own family members to be able to address many of those things, because you're their son, their daughter, their granddaughter, their niece, their nephew. And there ends up being a lot of emotions, and the emotions aren't necessarily about the thing. The emotions are about the fear and frustration of the need to move, the need to downsize. I just lost my partner, and now I know I have to leave my house, but I'm angry, I'm depressed, I'm frustrated that I just lost my partner. And the things end up with additional emotional attachments to them as you are trying to help someone achieve what they said, which is that I don't want to be living here anymore. I want to move to Florida. I want to move to North Dakota and live with my daughter. But in order to do that, we have to be able to deal with somebody's stuff. So Deborah, I know you spent a lot of time helping people dealing with the downsizing issues. What kind of services are available? And let's say, let's make it even, mom wants to move to North Dakota. She wants to move in with one of her daughters. Her other daughter is here. They've lived in the house for 40 odd years. She's moving because she lost her husband. What are kinds of different services to make that process easier for somebody?
So you raise a really good point about the conflict that can exist between family members. One of the things I often tell people is I can work with your spouse or your adult children or your parents when you can't, because you and I can say the exact same thing and it's going to get heard really differently. I like to say that I am, non-judgmental, can work with anybody in the world except for my own mother. And in fact, when we were moving my mom from one assisted living facility in New York to another one in Maine, I hired a colleague to help her because I knew it would be easier and less confrontational. So having an impartial person can really take the emotion out of the situation, because otherwise it really can end up being contentious and you don't want that.
Yeah, and I know
So
when you've worked with clients as well that it's not just the downsizing, it's also the what do you do with the stuff. So
absolutely.
I believe you also work with folks, big item clean out, charitable donation, selling stuff. So how can you
So
help people once
right.
you've identified what they're not keeping because I mean, I know that I was raised this way. If it has a use, it's a sin to throw it away, right? So you have to do something with it.
Right. And, as I said early on in this discussion, most of us are very attached emotionally to our stuff, and it's hard to part with it. And what I have found in over 25 years of helping people do this is that if it's going in the trash, it's really hard to part with things. But if you know that it's going to get a second life and benefit somebody else, it's a little bit easier to make that decision. There are so many charities out there who are hungry for your stuff. They're willing to accept it. They have um, clientele who can benefit from it. You get a tax receipt in most cases, and it gets out of your house. So donating is really a win-win-win situation. And even now during COVID, while there are a number of places like Goodwill that are not open, there are quite a lot in the Morris County area that are open and taking donations. I dropped stuff off last week.
Do
So
you have any examples at all, or is that maybe something we can circulate
sure.
to the audience via
Market Street,
email?
Mission,
Mhm.
on George Street in Morristown is open 5 days a week. They are closed on Wednesdays and Sundays, but from 10 o'clock until 3:30, they are very happy to take your donations. And what's really nice is you just drive up to their loading dock and they will unload everything out of your car. So you only have to get it in, they'll take it out, and then they hand you a tax receipt.
And that was Morris Street Mission, you said?
Market Street,
Market
Mission.
Street Mission, got it.
Another one, Homeless Solutions, has a drop box on Jean Street in Morristown where the clothes are actually used by people as opposed to being sold for rags in a third world country. So that's something else that I find that clients often are concerned about. Will somebody really benefit from this, or is it going to be destroyed in some way? And they have a drop box. They take clothing, shoes, and toys.
Excellent. Yeah, so one of the things is downsizing. The other is you have to deal with is when you've inherited a house or a house is part of an estate. As I said, you didn't just inherit the house, you inherited all the stuff in the house. And oftentimes the goal of the estate is to sell the house, and you cannot sell a house that has lots and lots of stuff sitting inside the house. Many times we have executors that are out of state. They may be on the other side of the country. We've had, that they're out of the country. And you need to be able to go through things. And I go back to that emotional, because if you've just lost a loved one and now you're going through their personal property, whether it has any extrinsic value or not, there's a lot of heart that's tied to that. So Deborah, I know you've had a lot of success in being hired by executors to help them go through, clean out, identify what can be given to people, even assist in getting it to the people who want it, and getting the house so that it's ready for sale.
Yes, so there are lots of options. You can do an estate sale and sell the things and use the proceeds to split between the beneficiaries. You can donate the things, as I mentioned, or there are junk removal companies that will come. The there are a couple that I deal with very frequently, and people get the wrong impression from the term junk removal. What they do is they take things back to their warehouse and then they sort everything. And anything that is in good condition that can be donated, they donate. They have relationships with lots of nonprofit organizations, everything from Habitat for Humanity, Big Brothers Big Sisters, and so on. And they will donate things and give you the tax receipt. They don't keep that. Anything that can't be donated but can be recycled, whether it's metal or wood or things like that, they will do that. And only a very small portion of what they take, maybe 3 to 5%, actually ends up in a landfill. So it's a fairly quick way of getting things out. The downside is that you are paying for that service as opposed to having an estate sale where you are being paid. So
Okay, so one is
like many things, it's a time money trade-off.
which is what we were talking about at the very top of this when it comes to organizing and decluttering. Are you doing it? Is somebody else doing it? It's a time and money trade-off, as are all things in life. So you mentioned there's actually a question here. Are there any of the removal companies that you recommend in the area, or could we send an email out afterwards of anybody that you've worked with, or should people just contact you because
Yeah,
it
they
might
can
depend on what
contact me
area they're
because some of them vary by what geographic area they cover. So if
in? Okay,
they reach out to me, then I can connect them with somebody who covers the area of their home.
excellent.
The other thing that you can do with some of that sentimental stuff is there are different ways to kind of capture the memory without necessarily saving the item in its big, bulky physical form. And anything from photo albums. I've taken pictures of clients' collections. I had one client who collected all kinds of military memorabilia, and she was moving from a 4-bedroom house to a 400 square foot assisted living facility. We took pictures of everything and made a small photo album that took up, half an inch of space on a shelf, and she had that memory of the collection. You can make quilts out of t-shirts or sentimental clothing. There's a company that will make teddy bears out of grandma's fur coat that you have no interest in wearing, but you want to keep the memory of it. And there are also lots of places like theater companies that love vintage and period pieces and furniture.
Oh, see, those are all just really, really wonderful ideas. Now, one of the things I do have to say, because we're talking about, assisting somebody or dealing with an estate, when you're a fiduciary, your job is to work for somebody else's benefit. So if you're helping a loved one downsize, there's no self-help to their stuff that's involved in that. You're helping them downsize, and determine what it is that they need to be able to take with them. The same thing if you're the executor of an estate or you're the trustee of a trust. These things have value, and while it is your job to be able to get the house in broom clean condition for sale, I also just warn you that if you are going to be selecting pieces of furniture, you got to let everybody else have a fair opportunity to do the same thing, in terms of being a fiduciary for what it is that you're doing. One other thing, before we get to the point where we're closing things out, which I talk to my clients about often, my older clients, why not give things away now to family members so they can enjoy them? Okay. Again,
Absolutely.
we're doing this in January. We just came off the holidays. My mother-in-law had given me from her mother's home some beautifully cut crystal glasses. We use those at Thanksgiving. So I took a picture and I sent it to her to see that we're enjoying what it is that she sent. Over the years, I have inherited my grandmother's holiday dish collection. So for the holidays, those were all out, and I took pictures and not only sent them to my mother, but I sent them to my uncle to show that things are being used. I think that that's really powerful for people when you're looking to give things new life. When you talk about that, I don't want to give it away and not have somebody use it, is to maybe, if you have, I don't know, 6 fur coats and you have somebody who is going to use a fur coat, maybe they enjoy it while you're still here.
My grandmother did that. When I got engaged, she gave me a necklace that she'd been planning to leave to me in her will. And she said, I'd really rather see you wear it and enjoy it. And it was great. And every time I wore it, she got a thrill from it. And every time I wear it now, I remember her. And
So sometimes I get the question of if an estate donates assets, is there a tax deduction for the estate? And the answer to that is no, because unless the charity is named a beneficiary, there's not a tax deduction for that. What ends up happening is that it flows through to the beneficiaries of the estate so that they could take the tax deduction. Because if the will says, I leave all my stuff to my 3 children, and my 3 children collectively donated $3,000 worth of property, then each of them gets a charitable donation for $1,000. That's a question that often comes up, so I just wanted to talk about that. If we just flip to the end, we're winding down on our time here. There are a couple of questions that we got in that I would like to talk about. If you can flip to the next slide. One of the questions is, with the challenges with security, are there any suggestions on keeping cloud or computer-based documents safe? So is there any, do you have any thought processes around that?
I think there's some level of risk with anything. So that's why I said it depends a little bit on your comfort level, but I feel like, it's a cost benefit trade-off. And I think for the most part, having the things accessible and safe in the cloud is a reasonable precaution or a reasonable risk.
And you can also, consider, let's say you get all of your statements electronic, except for once a year you download a statement. Maybe you keep that in a specific location, but you black out, the account numbers that are on it. I think it's a very reasonable question from a security standpoint of what it is that you need to do. What the financial institutions, they've been dealing with, this cloud-based security concept well before we called it this, for the past 20 years. If you're dealing with, how it is that you do things electronically when it comes to your things. Some people I know put something on a thumb drive, and the thumb drive has a password, and they whisper to somebody what the password is, which is awesome. But if that person is no longer here and doesn't have the password, that's not really going to do you a lot of good. But it does come down to that cost benefit. And I think, Deborah, that's a good reason why people can talk to you about what their technological skill level is, what their comfort level is, and to come up with a solution that works for them in terms of doing it. If we can flip to the next slide, there was one more question that was had, which is, you recommend like a password account list. And I just want to talk about this because I absolutely do recommend a password system.
As do I.
I use Dashlane. There are a number that are out there. So I just want to explain to you, there are 3 passwords that I remember. 3. I have the password to my phone. I have the password to get into my computer system at the office. And I have the password to my Dashlane account. My Dashlane account then assigns a random, when I say a random password, it's like backward caret, upside down exclamation point, capital A, small a followed by a colon, like nothing a person could ever think. And it's like 18 characters long. It randomly assigns a password to every single account. So I don't actually know the passwords to any of my accounts. I know my Dashlane password, and my Dashlane then opens up the accounts. You can share the passwords with certain, not all of them. You can share all of them with somebody. You can share some of them with somebody. So like if somebody's helping you with your bank accounts or something along those lines. And I have, since I've had Dashlanes, had some of my passwords stolen. I've been subject to a variety of data breaches, just like we all have. But I've had 2 pieces of comfort. Number 1, they got one password that I literally don't use for anything else. And number 2, I just went into Dashlane and updated to yet another secured password. So I don't know if you recommend the same.
I do. I personally use LastPass, but it's very similar.
Same concept, yes.
Very similar to Dashlane. One thing that you want to make sure is that you're not using password 1234 as your password, or using the same password, your kitten's name for everything, because as you said, should something get compromised, that becomes a problem.
Yes.
And I don't know if Dashlane does this, but with LastPass, in addition to having passwords, you can input things like credit card numbers and other information, so that if you're shopping online, you can pull it right from your password manager and not be worried about having that information around. You don't want it saved on when you're logging into sites. You don't want them saving your password. And the reason people do that is because it's easy, it's a time saver. But if you have it in your password manager, it can just fill it in, and then you clear the site and it's not floating out there. So
Yeah,
it's an
and
extra level of safety.
it works on your laptop, it works on your mobile device. You
Yes.
know, I really, I do recommend that people consider having a password manager, just because there's no way to keep track of them all. If your password gets too complex, human nature, you're writing it down in a sticky note and attaching it to your laptop, which is not a secure thing to do. And then the other is sometimes having passwords that actually have like words strung together, as opposed to trying to remember a password with 17 random numbers, just because the human brain doesn't work that well to be able to do that.
So
So
one
we're
trick,
coming to the, go ahead.
I was just going to share one trick that I have heard works well because it's easy for you to remember but hard for somebody else to guess, is to pick a line of your favorite song and use the first letter of each word.
Yeah, it's things that are easy. So we're humans. So at some point in time, we need to make it a little bit easier for us to be able to do. You know, so Deborah, first of all, thank you again so much for joining us. I
Oh,
have
thanks
all
for
sorts of
having
notes
me.
here. My mantra now is love it, use it, want to maintain. And when I'm done with that, I'm either be going to Market Street Mission or to Homeless Solutions. Now that I know that I have two options where I can actually donate my stuff right now,
Yeah,
which has been a problem. We've been home during COVID.
it has.
I have an entire room full of stuff that I'm willing to donate. I just haven't had any place to be able to send it. So I think that that's a great thing. Any other last words of wisdom, something you want to make sure to leave our audience with?
So I would say start now, because it's not going to get, the volume of stuff isn't going to get any less unless you start. Do a little bit, spend 15 minutes, set a timer. When the timer goes off, you can either stop, or if you're on a roll, keep going. But do a little bit every day, every week, and whittle away at it. And don't leave it for somebody else. You know, I think it's something like 8,000 Americans are turning 65 every single day. So if it's not our own stuff, it's our family stuff. And at some point, you're going to have to deal with it. So make it sooner rather than later.
I think that that's great advice to give. If you have any other questions, at porzioplanning.com will be a copy of this video. If you want to go back, you want to share it with your friends, share it with your spouse and say, hey, we really need to do something about this. Share it with your parents, whatever the case may be, as well as all of our prior videos. We have lots of articles on there. Just again, things that our clients have asked us, that instead of just answering our clients, we're answering in a public arena, because we assume if one person asks us the question, somebody else has the question. Deborah's information is here. I know she works with, you know, households. She works with owners of small businesses. These days, organizing your office, maybe I work at a big business, but I'm stuck being at home and I just need, you know, a way that I can have my space, my two children can have their space, my spouse can have their space. We can all be productive and run our household, because that's just the reality of what we're dealing with right now. So her phone number is there, as well as her email is there. She is as passionate about organizing as I am about estates and families and taxes. So I know that she's very passionate about it. I appreciate everybody, you know, coming today. If you have questions, please reach out to either one of us via email, or looking at our websites. And with that, I leave you with a bit of a joke, because we are 8 days into 2021. So dear 2021, I have started your 10-day trial. I've decided that I do not want to continue my subscription to 2021. So I hope that if you are listening to this later, that joke falls on totally deaf ears. What are you talking about? You know, here's for hoping for a better year after we got through the year that 2020 was. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.